April 1941, in the Libyan desert outside Tobruk, Erwin Rommel watched his armored columns roll toward the Australian defensive lines, certain his tanks would smash through within hours. By nightfall, reality looked very different. 17 of his 38 tanks were burning or disabled in the sand. The attack didn't fail because of a single wonder weapon. It collapsed because the defenders had built a layered anti-tank system, minefields, 2-pounder guns, artillery firing over open sights, and smaller, ruthless weapons reserved for targets the big guns ignored. One of those weapons weighed just 36 pounds, fed from a top-mounted magazine holding 5 rounds, and had already been dismissed by military planners on both sides as useless against modern armor. The boy's anti-tank rifle couldn't destroy a Panzer head-on, but it could cripple the systems that kept tanks moving and fighting. That proved far more important than anyone had anticipated. The boy's rifle was born from a problem that plagued British planners throughout the 1930s. Tanks were becoming tougher every year, while infantry had almost nothing to stop them. A soldier watching a steel behemoth approach had only 2 real choices: flee or be killed. The War Office demanded a solution that an individual infantryman could carry, that could penetrate armor at battlefield distances, and that cost far less than assigning anti-tank guns to every platoon. Captain Henry Charles Boys of the Royal Small Arms Factory at Enfield took on the task in October 1934 under the secret project name Stanchion. Boys understood the core physics involved. Armor penetration required speed. Achieving that speed from a man-portable weapon meant designing a cartridge that delivered maximum muzzle energy without shattering the shooter's shoulder. He settled on a 5.55-inch 13.9mm caliber round. The original Mark I fired a 60-gram projectile at 747 meters per second. By December 1939, it was replaced by the improved Mark II, which demonstrated a lighter 47-gram bullet at roughly 884 meters per second. Later in the war, engineers experimented with tungsten-cored ammunition in an effort to regain effectiveness as armor thickness increased. But the core limitation never disappeared. At 100 yards, the round could penetrate about 23 millimeters of armor at a straight angle. At 500 yards, penetration dropped to around 19 millimeters. Introduce realistic battlefield angles, and those figures declined sharply. It was enough for light vehicles, but completely inadequate against medium tanks. The finished rifle measured over 63 inches long, required a 2-man team to move efficiently, and featured a large muzzle brake and padded shoulder rest to tame its brutal recoil. Captain Boys never lived to see his weapon issued. He died in November 1937, only days before the War Office officially adopted the rifle and named it in his honor, though German intelligence documents repeatedly misspelled it as Boys throughout the war. Manufacturing was carried out by Birmingham Small Arms, the Royal Small Arms Factory at Enfield, and John Inglis and Company in Canada. By the time production ended in the autumn of 1943, around 62,000 rifles had been built, an enormous investment in a weapon many critics increasingly labeled worthless. Those critics were focusing on the wrong targets. Calling the Boys rifle obsolete depended entirely on what it was used against. Facing Panzer III and Panzer IV variants that began appearing in North Africa from 1941 onward, the rifle truly was ineffective. 50 millimeters of frontal armor rendered its 23 millimeters of penetration meaningless. British troops learned this the hard way. One sergeant from the King's Royal Rifle Corps recalled firing at a tank from just 50 yards during the French campaign. The shot landed perfectly, stripping paint, but the tank kept advancing. He dropped the rifle and retreated. But the Western Desert wasn't filled solely with Panzer IIIs. Rommel's Afrika Korps operated alongside Italian units equipped with older vehicles. L3/33 and L3/35 tankettes carried armor between 6 and 14 millimeters thick, well within the rifle's capabilities. Heavier Italian tanks like the M13/40 offered stronger protection and could shrug off frontal hits, but the tankettes and armored cars screening Axis movements remained vulnerable. and Italian forces made up roughly half of Axis armored strength in the theater. Beyond tanks were the soft-skinned vehicles that kept armies alive: fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, staff cars, and lightly armored vehicles like the German SDKFZ-222, protected by just 8 millimeters of armor. The boy's rifle could destroy all of them from positions heavier anti-tank guns couldn't reach. Critics forgot a simple truth: wars run on fuel and ammunition, not tanks alone. The rifle proved its value even before the desert fighting began. In Norway, April 1940, Platoon Sergeant Major John Shepard of the 1st 5th Battalion Leicestershire Regiment faced advancing German armor near the village of Tretton. According to multiple accounts, he had never fired a boy's rifle before that morning. Working calmly and deliberately, he placed multiple armor-piercing rounds into each approaching vehicle.
2 German tanks were permanently knocked out. The rest turned back. It stands as one of the earliest confirmed cases of British ground troops destroying German armor during the Second World War. Just a month later in France, Sergeant William Gilchrist of the Irish Guards held a street corner at Boulogne for nearly 2 hours, armed only with a boy's anti-tank rifle and sheer resolve. His official citation records that he struck and ignited an enemy tank, blocking the road and allowing his battalion to withdraw. He stayed in position until constant firing caused the rifle to jam. Before moving on to how this weapon influenced Rommel's desert tactics, if you're enjoying this deep look into overlooked British engineering, consider subscribing. It takes a moment, costs nothing, and helps the channel grow. Back to North Africa. During Operation Compass in December 1940, the 4th 6th Rajputana Rifles and the 1st Northumberland Fusiliers engaged Italian forces at Tumar East. Unit war diaries confirm that 2 M1339 tanks and 6 trucks were destroyed by boys' rifle fire. In another action, the 7th Hussars eliminated 5 Italian CV tankettes in a single engagement. Contemporary reports also credit Private O'Neill of the Australian forces with destroying 3 Italian tanks using a boy's rifle, an achievement that stunned observers given the weapon's growing reputation as ineffective. Then came Tobruk. General Leslie Morshed organized the Australian defense into a layered system designed to counter German armored dominance. The outer perimeter absorbed the initial tank assault while infantry remained concealed. Once the panzers pushed past the first line, Australian troops rose to engage the following German infantry. The second defensive belt deployed 2-pounder anti-tank guns and 25-pounder artillery firing over open sights, the true tank killers.
Woven throughout this entire network were boys' rifle teams. Their task was to engage armored cars, light vehicles, and reconnaissance units searching for weak points. On April 14, 1941, Rommel launched his attack expecting a rapid breakthrough. Instead, the integrated defense crushed those expectations. 17 of 38 tanks were destroyed or disabled, and the assault was called off. It wasn't one weapon that stopped Rommel, it was the system. The boy's rifle mattered because it filled the gaps, striking targets the heavier guns ignored and strengthening the layered defense that taught German commanders costly lessons about underestimating British anti-tank coordination. The rifle's clearest validation came not in Africa, but in the Pacific. At Milne Bay in Papua on August 27, 1942, Corporal John Francis Patrick O'Brien of the 210th Infantry Battalion engaged Japanese Type 95 Hago tanks advancing on Australian positions. With armor ranging from 6 to 12 millimeters, the Type 95 was vulnerable to the supposedly obsolete rifle. One of those tanks, riddled with boys' rifle penetrations, now sits at the Australian War Memorial, its steel still bearing visible entry holes. Days earlier at Makin Island, U.S. Marine raiders borrowed Canadian-made boys' rifles for their assault. 2 Japanese seaplanes landed in a lagoon carrying reinforcements. From the shoreline, boys' rifle teams opened fire. One aircraft burst into flames. The second crashed while attempting to take off after repeated hits tore into its hull. A weapon written off as useless had just been employed successfully in an anti-aircraft role. German commanders understood both the rifle's strengths and its limits. Their own equivalent, the Panzerbüchse 39, actually outperformed the boys, penetrating roughly 30 millimeters of armor, compared to the British rifle's 23. Even so, Germany halted production in November 1941, the same period British troops were supposedly crippled by their outdated weapon. Both nations accepted that anti-tank rifles could not defeat modern tank armor. Only Britain continued finding alternative ways to use the massive investment already made. Soldiers despised firing the boys. Australians nicknamed it Charlie the Bastard. The recoil caused neck strains, shoulder injuries, and even occasional detached retinas, despite the padded stock and large muzzle brake. The blast was so violent that troops were advised to protect their hearing whenever possible. Dark humor followed. Men joked that firing the double nickel should automatically qualify someone for the Victoria Cross. In 1942, a Canadian government training film produced by Disney directly addressed the rifle's reputation as cursed, attempting to rebuild confidence in a deeply unpopular but still effective weapon. By mid-1943, the boys' rifle vanished from frontline units, replaced by the PIAT, the Projector Infantry Anti-Tank. But the end of its service did not end its impact. 62,000 rifles meant 62,000 positions where infantry could challenge armored threats without waiting for dedicated anti-tank guns. In the Western Desert, that translated into tens of thousands of dangers to Italian tankettes, supply convoys, and reconnaissance vehicles testing defensive lines. Declared obsolete against the enemy it was originally designed to defeat, the rifle proved highly effective against the opponents it actually faced. Tobruk taught German commanders a hard lesson. British forces would not shape their defenses around German expectations. A coordinated system mixing supposedly outdated rifles with modern anti-tank guns and field artillery firing over open sights could shatter armored assaults. The success came from integration. Every component had a role, and the boys' rifle filled the spaces heavier weapons could not cover. The rifle never won battles on its own. No weapon ever does. But it covered gaps nothing else could, engaged targets heavier systems ignored, and strengthened defensive networks that forced German planners to rethink armored warfare. 62,000 rifles, 36 pounds each, roughly 23 millimeters of penetration at close range, officially ineffective against medium tanks, yet practically lethal against almost everything else. Once dismissed as useless, the boys' rifle now rests in museums from Canberra to London, many examples still bearing the marks of combat. One Japanese Type 95 tank in Australia remains punctured with visible holes, steel proof of what technical specifications suggested and veterans confirmed. The boys' anti-tank rifle worked. Not always against what it was intended to destroy, but always against something that needed to be stopped. British engineers did not create a flawless weapon. They created one that soldiers adapted to the realities of war, discovering uses its designers never predicted and roles its critics never considered. That adaptability, the refusal to discard a tool simply because it failed at its primary mission, defined British military pragmatism throughout the conflict. A rifle meant to stop tanks ended up destroying supply trucks, aircraft, tankettes, and armored cars. It helped defeat Japanese armor in jungle fighting and taught Rommel a final lesson: wars are not won by panzers alone. Obsolete is a word for peacetime. In war, there is only what works and what doesn't. The boys' rifle worked.